of all, I think you shouldn't be doing politics, and you shouldn't be doing anything on social justice until you've properly understood and walked with the people that are actually facing the challenges. There are plenty of people who kind of take jobs that are kind of in the social justice sphere or in the political sphere who've never tried to actually understand the challenges that communities are facing. Right. We need to give the voices back to those that are actually facing these injustices. We don't need Lord so-and-so and Baroness blah, who've never been anywhere near our state education system, proposing what they think ought to be done.
So I'm so happy to have Sarah Webster, who I am grateful to call one of my very good friends, who we've known each other for years now. I think we met back in 2008-09 during the Uprising Leadership Program. And how long, I mean, bloody hell, how was that, like 13 years ago, 12 years ago. And to see your journey from being somebody who, when I first met you, was like, this person's got such a good energy, I want to be her friend, to then being someone who's been inspired by the work you've done, and often you've been giving me advice. And so to have this conversation is very cool, because hopefully we'll be able to share some of the things you've learnt along the way with our listeners, and hopefully the people that they are connected to who they'll share this with. So Sarah, you've had a long career in the non-profit world, as well as dabbling in politics. Please, introduce yourself. Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to be here. So, we met, didn't we, on the Uprising Leadership Program, and I had quite recently at that point made a shift from the private sector into working for a charity in Tower Hamlets. And I guess it's helpful maybe to give a bit of context. So I grew up quite a middle class area of rural Scotland. You wouldn't guess it by the accent, but I am from Scotland. Landed in London to go to university at Queen Mary University. Transformational experience, brilliant, multicultural, diverse community, and settled in Tower Hamlets in East London. And then but set off from my law degree into a job in the city, and it was a friend who persuaded me to start some volunteering in a youth club.
How did that friend do that? Did they just say
They literally didn't let me go. When I said once, we used to play football together, and at the end of a game one day I mentioned that I was sort of looking to do something because I felt a bit guilty for my day job, and thought that giving back in the evening would help me to deal with that.
So it was like guilt.
So it was a bit, definitely my inner driver was a bit of guilt. And so she just kept on at me. After I'd said yes once, she just every week until I actually turned up, she was on my back. And she's done that to me ever since, and in many other ways she's driven me into certain things that I've not regretted ever since. And so I landed at this youth club just a few minutes from where I live, and having these conversations with these kids who were growing up on the estates nearby, and obviously it's one of the highest levels of child poverty in the country, in Tower Hamlets. Yeah. And there were lots of conversations that just opened my eyes and changed my understanding of poverty in this country. But there's one that always sticks with me, and there was this girl, and we were cooking together, because we used to cook healthy food and play football with them and things like that. And she said to me, she asked me about where I lived, and I explained to her that I was in a house share. So I said, I live with some other girls not far from here. And she turned to me and she said, are you in a foster care home like me? And just for me, that moment of her assumption of, if you explain that you were in a shared house, the assumption must be that you're living in you're in foster care, was just it was just so different. Suddenly I just realised the differences of our experiences. And what that led me to do is I just felt this sense of, it was I was obliged to spend what I had trying to make a difference for those kids, because those kids were just as talented, just as capable as anyone I'd known growing up. But because of where they were born and because of their, the poverty that they existed in, they were never going to have the opportunities in life that I had already had. And so a few months later, that same charity happened to have a job, and I said goodbye to my healthy salary, and I moved into this brilliant charity in East London. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? I'll give it a couple of years, and if it isn't working out, I'll go back into the private sector. But that was 11, 12 years ago, and I've not looked back since.
I mean, just on that, because that is a huge move, and I kind of want to go into that a bit more, because we often think of things around social justice or volunteering or things about making a difference are something you do either, on the side, on weekends and evenings, mornings, or even in retirement. Some people say, I will do the good stuff after I've had a long career and made a lot of money. Now, there are a bunch of professionals who kind of maybe be thinking that themselves, and they contribute in different ways, right? Through donations or through one-off events and so forth. But what really was it that made you, as you say, sacrifice this healthy salary to then go into the not-profit world? Was it really that experience with that young girl, or tell me what was going through your mind at that point?
There was a number of things, but one of them was that I realised it was the best bit of my week. And I took a few months off, and I went to South America and had, again, like I think when you experience different cultures and different levels of poverty and things like that, it really challenges all the assumptions that you might have when you're sitting in your quite comfortable existence in middle class London. But I also came back to the office from that time off, and I just realised like that was the bit I'd missed. That was, I was just, was I looking forward to go back into the office? No. So in some ways you could say it was a bit of a, there was an element of selfishness. There was why wouldn't I spend the time doing something that I love? And I still say that, every day since I made that decision, I've always been 100% assured on the decision I took on my finances. So, I knew I was going into it very aware of, I wasn't going to earn as much money as some of my friends, etc., etc. And I was okay with that. Okay. But also that I was going to be...
Why were you okay with that? Because
because the
kind of spark of the glitz is very bright.
Yeah.
And because this is very important, because loads of people trying to figure out, what career I'm going to do, what I'm going to spend my waking hours doing. And there are so many programs out there which are focused on getting talent into banking, into technology, which is great. We do need a diverse group of talent in different industries. But I think one thing that lacks within the non-profit sector or within the activism group or whatever, our ability to attract talented, ambitious people. We do have a lot of that, but I'm saying what was it that converted you?
I think in the end, it's what's a life well lived? You know what I mean? And when you die, doesn't matter how much money you've made. Okay, absolutely, I understand the sort of idea of being able to set up your family at least comfortably and not wanting to live in a sort of poverty or anything like that. So there is that level of being and I always had aspiration therefore that even though I moved into the sector, I was going to progress because I needed, I did need a better salary than what I started on. So I was always pretty set on I was going to go in, do a good job, and I was at least going to, progress within the charity sector. And to say that, the sector itself, it's not bad there are some situations, but it's not bad wages. But I think, it was that piece of, at the end of when I look back on my time, do I want to look back on it just with pride and how much gold I've stored up? Or do I want to look back on it and feel that it was a life well lived and it was a meaningful endeavour that I invested in? And also just that I'm such a strong believer, and this is where I think, absolutely, some people, what they are made for is to go off and create big businesses. And yes, of course, we need successful, responsible businesses out there. And businesses can drive incredible amounts of change, and the right people in leadership in those is so important. But there is also this piece around where do your strengths really lie? And in the end, I knew that in my previous job, I didn't get, yes, it was nice when the money hit my account and when I made commission or bonus, but actually that wasn't the thing that really got me up in the morning. And the things that drive me will be different to the things that drive you, but I know what drives me is both seeing the development of people. So I love leading teams. I like the way that I can do that with community, etc., and the sort of people that might be involved in the charity. I also love connections, and I love building networks, and I love seeing how that can have impact. And so I've just always sought to do roles where those strengths really get played out. And then I like the purpose of an organisation, and for me that's been around young people, and for other people it'll be different. But I think it's tapping into that.
No, that's great. That's great advice. And I think it's something which I've kind of followed as well. And so for you then, starting your career, that was the beginning of your journey. I'd love to hear about some of the challenges that you faced in your work. From the work you're doing at City Gateway, And then the work, and I don't know if you want to talk about that, the work you were doing with Susie Stride, politically, and then the Fabians. Again, as I say, we can edit the stuff as well if you don't want certain things in it. But yeah, it would be great to kind of hear about maybe a social injustice that you saw, and you mentioned poverty a few times, but there might be other things. A social injustice that you saw that you really wanted to make a difference on, and how you approached trying to respond to that.
Yeah, so I guess fast forward today and like where I've got to now, and I've been like fundraising has been the area that I've really focused on the last few years. I've been the director of fundraising and communications at a big London-based charity called Greenhouse Sports for the last few years.
And what's Greenhouse Sports?
And Greenhouse Sports is all about so it's all about going into schools with really aspirational, really high qualified sports coaches who are placed full time as an additional member of staff into the school system. And if you think that in private schools they get all of this extracurricular investment, and we know it works, we know it's important, and so why not have that in the poorest schools in our city? Why not have those kids having those same opportunities? And some of them go on and do amazingly in their sport, but to be honest, we're much more concerned about what they do in the rest of their lives, the individuals, the citizens that they're becoming, and the way that having a mentor and a coach in your life can be so transformational to how you engage with the rest of your life. And you and I will have benefited from that and know the power of that in our professional lives. And why not, again, why wouldn't you put that in place for young people who are facing the most extreme difficulties with issues in their family, potentially being homeless, not having enough money to put food on the table, and therefore, like, how do they have the sort of capability to come into school and sit down in the system we currently have, which is, you know, sit down with your pen and paper and listen to something from the front, and it's all so outdated. And often particularly disadvantages groups and young people that are facing additional challenges. And so Greenhouse is all about trying to address some of that injustice. And so, you know, they're now also working on some work with a charity called the Big Change Foundation, and I'm thinking with them about how do we actually bring like transformation to our education system.
Okay.
And what do we need to do to create a system for the future that will free schools of some of the kind of requirements and the approaches that are currently taken that kind of prevent them from being able to provide a really equitable system where all can thrive.
Yeah.
But, you know, all of that stems from, I guess, those moments in that youth club and meeting those young people, and all the young people I've met along the way who just continue like to inspire me.
Yeah.
For me, like my driver and the thing that really gets me is around like every young person in this country should have the same chance to succeed in life. We've got so much talent on our council estates, and yet the strongest indicator of all of your future life outcomes is the postcode in which you were born, and right up to obviously the most extreme being, you know, the poorest postcodes, the richest. That's 20 years difference in life expectancy. Like, that's not okay. And so, you know, my drive, my mission is to address that. But there's a lot of wider pieces as well, and I don't kind of turn my blind eye to homelessness or issues with our justice system or health inequalities. And I think that's where you can't avoid the kind of political angle, because, you know, my belief is unless we've got a party making the decisions in the House of Commons and deciding on budgets and taxation and those sorts of things, you can't really address all of these inequalities. And so over the years, I spent years door knocking in Harlow for the Labour Party with a good friend of mine, Susie. And the challenges, you sort of mentioned the challenges that I faced. Gosh, I mean, early one, I definitely, and I think it's a flag for lots of us, is burnout. Like when you're starting out, and it can take your life from you because you care so much, right? It's not about because you can get paid more because you turn up and you do 12 hours or 15 hours or whatever it is that it might take. And there were times at City Gateway, we were growing at an incredible rate. We were having a massive impact on the community. We were getting hundreds of young people into jobs through apprenticeships who just would have been completely unemployable if it hadn't been for us. And we were just working far more hours than the day had. And there was one point that I remember I wrote a resignation email, and we'd done this huge campaign with Evening Standard newspaper. I was like 25 years old. I had a huge team of temps just appear at a desk when I came back from holiday. We were being managed by the newspaper for particular headlines. And I had nothing left. I wrote this email saying, I don't think I'm the right person, I can't do this. And thinking the failure was on me. And actually what I was lucky about is that the person who, was sort of COO at the time, he received my email and he was right. He said to me, this isn't your failure. This is an organisation, this is a much bigger problem. We've put you up for something without the resource, without the support that you need. And so they put things in place and they persuaded me to stay, and I'm very glad that I did, because we then went on and had further success. But burnout, definitely a challenge and something we've all got to look out for.
I think that's a really important point, because oftentimes when you're faced with something you're really passionate about changing, you give it your all. You give it, not only your time, but your energy. Your mind is always thinking about how you can try and address it. But I think the important point you make is that sometimes you think it's about our doing, but actually we also need to think about the organisations and the processes which we're part of. And as leaders, particularly if you're starting an organisation and building a movement, definitely something to think about, just in terms of the longevity of a movement. As you say, burnout, it really does impact a lot. And I've seen a lot of people, particularly those who maybe started in the early 20s, did a few years, then late 20s or mid 20s, is like, oof. And some people then stop forever. And you're like, that is a lot of wasted years or talent going away just because they feel like they can no longer participate or do anything. And I think not only does that come from energy being spent on the campaigns, on the projects, but also kind of the pressures of which this kind of work brings. I'd love to hear more about kind of how you practically kind of responded to this. So, as a fundraiser, you know more than most that in order to do something, you need resources, you need time, you need people, and you need money. For people out there who are young, who are like, I want to build an organisation to help my fellow mates in the estate, change their aspirations, or for the professional who wants to quit their job and think about setting something up where they can provide services to homeless women. I mean, what is your approach to fundraising, and why is it important for people to really think about that?
Yeah, so my first thing would be we need a lot more humility, we need a lot more collaboration in the sector. And so therefore, the first thing I would say to anybody is, first of all, look at what's already being done. I always forget this figure, it's awful, but the number of charities we have in this country is unbelievable.
How many?
You will have to Google it and look it up. So we've got, there are so many organisations, particularly if you're around London, if there isn't already a charity doing what you're thinking about doing, I'd be surprised. In other parts of the country, maybe less so. Yeah. And it's usually about ego that we decide we have to set it up and we can't get behind someone else's efforts. So first of all, check that.
Okay.
Check yourself, right? And look at what's already being done and decide whether it is helpful and whether what you're doing is so special and so unique and so unmet and existing that it takes you to kind of take it on. Because then, on fundraising,
I've just seen there are, 132,000 charities in England, 7,000 in Wales, 19,000 in Scotland, and 4,000 in Ireland. Huge amount.
Huge amount.
So first piece of advice, check what's already being done and check your ego and make sure that you're delivering something which is delivering new value.
Yeah. And then, on fundraising, so, I have seen some crazy things in my fundraising time. I focus on philanthropy. I've worked with a lot of the most powerful and wealthy individuals in this city. I have seen things. I've seen an auction in the most probably sort of prestigious private members club. And somebody spent £180,000 on going to play some golf, with Tiger Woods being involved, and he was doing it he didn't even go to the golf, didn't even attend the competition, and he wasn't doing it because of the charity. He was doing it because he hoped somebody connected to the charity might join his company board, right? So what's
the lesson in that?
I think the lesson is that it's just an awareness of philanthropy in its best is an incredible force for good, for innovation, particularly for demonstrating what the state is too scared or unable to do, and for driving, for driving social change. but it's also an incredibly often unjust way of money being distributed. It's done a lot through networks and connections. It's often done without much strategy behind it. There's only, quite a small number, particularly of individuals, who really have thought through their philanthropic strategy properly. I've just read the story about what's going on right now with Boris's fundraising campaign and the Tories, and there's their sort of £250,000 club where all these rich people are getting direct links to our Prime Minister to lobby for lower taxation. It's that's the murky world of philanthropy. And the problem is, for somebody breaking into and starting their fundraising journey, is finding those connections and building those networks is extremely difficult.
Okay. And how it is difficult, and I've built organisations past and been lucky to have been backed by philanthropists, people giving small amounts, the whole range of different kinds of forms of funding. How do you actually overcome that difficulty, or what do you advise people who are thinking, wow, this is a big task ahead? Where do I start?
I mean, first of all, tenacity. So you've got to do so much research and really identify where you think there will be overlap, and then fundamentally, it might take you. There's a good stat, which is even in an existing organisation, this isn't starting from scratch, but you shouldn't expect any significant gift from a new donor really for about 18 months from when you first sort of connect.
18 months?
On average, it takes 18 months to land a decent gift of, maybe, and depending on your size as an organisation, that number might vary. It might be 25 grand, or it might be 150 grand, or it might be £1 million, depending on what your total picture looks like. It takes a long time. It takes a bit of luck, and personally, again, this goes back to look at what's already being done, and see if there isn't something you can't get behind in order to build your network out before you step out by yourself. So I've very sort of fortunately, but also slightly strategically, I've chosen organisations and roles where I know that I will get access beyond necessarily my job title, etc. Because then at every stage of my career, I was pitching to directors of banks when I was 24 years old with this City Gateway stuff because of that campaign. I got a $500,000 gift from a foundation in my second job. Just because I went into an organisation where there wasn't much of a seniority above me, so between me and the chief exec, I was the main fundraiser. And then I stepped into a charity which just has an exceptionally well-connected board, and I've built the relationships with them and through them with their networks.
Yeah.
And now I'm working, Big Change also has very well-known Holly Branson sitting on the board, so you can imagine as well that so I think strategically choosing and maybe doing some work, if you are thinking about setting up your own thing further down the line, don't miss out maybe a few years somewhere where you might just have a chance to build out those networks, so you're not starting from scratch and so you already have some credibility.
Great. As you say, philanthropy is plays such an important role in funding a lot of projects, and it really is about getting to know people with the money and also with access to people with money. And as the standard saying goes, it's often not what you know, but who you know, which I think is a lazy thing. You need to know stuff. You need to know things like the things you've just said about tenacity, about connections, but also just go out there and get to know people. I'd love to talk to you about the education side in a second, as well as the political side before we end. One last question on the fundraising side. On that question of how to get to know people, can you give an example of one of your proudest moments where you were able to secure funding for a project or a group of people that you're like, wow, this piece of work really had an impact on people and helped address a matter of social injustice?
So there are a few. There's one.
I'm sure. You've had a long career. It's such good.
And there's a few that I believe are still to come. There's some stuff I'm working on right now that which I'm excited about. It's not there yet, but basically this piece we're doing on kind of structural change in the education system. There's a very small handful of people that get this kind of philanthropy, right? It's very easy to get people to fund like starving children tomorrow, or greenhouse, put a coach in a school in you give me some money today, I'll get you a coach in a school in 3 months that will start having impact, and I'll be able to tell you in a year's time that you've helped 100 kids to have this many hours of coaching, etc., etc.
Why is that easier?
Because it's tangible. People want to like see the connection between what their money gives and gets. It's very easy to fundraise for like Felix Project, giving food to Londoners, because it's so like an immediate need and people can understand what they're giving to. When you start talking about, and the fourth group's a great example of it actually, like, will you fund us to think about like huge systemic issues that a lot of people struggle to understand, and actually we cannot be certain of what impact your money is going to have, because it's such a big, difficult world that we're existing in. But you've got to just kind of back and trust us that we're going to do some good stuff here, and it's probably going to be important to the future of our country. So there are a much smaller group of philanthropists that get that type of change, and I've identified like a handful of those that get that and have an interest in education and young people in this country. And then I spotted that one of them used to sit on a board with someone else that I knew through Greenhouse. So I contacted the person that I knew, and I'd spotted this and explained the project. And before I even said, and by the way, I spotted you, he said, oh, the person that comes to mind is that individual. And that led to the meeting being set up, the guy accepting the meeting. And this is somebody who, not easy to get hold of. And him combined with using another bit of, intelligence I found out about Holly Brunson being connected to a Goldman partner. Goldman partners all have significant amounts of money to give away, and again, like reconnecting them means that like I'm right now in the process of working up towards asking some people for some money towards this opportunity. That could be the piece in us then unlocking some much bigger money from some of the big trusts and foundations that are out there. So that's the one that I'm working towards, that I'll be proud of when it lands.
I know, that's amazing, because it has everything in there. It has the fact that you started knowing first off what value you were trying to bring to the world around education, and it being quite as you say, a particular sell to a particular group of people who kind of understand that big picture, big narrative, systemic kind of work. And then you went out and did your research. So really, as you use the word intelligence, gather that intelligence, figure out who's who, and then also there's a bit about personal relationships and building connections, and then having a meeting, pitching, and getting people involved. So I think those are, very important principles to take for anybody who's trying to raise cash, and I'm sure people have taken a lot from that story. Are you about to share one more? And I'm aware of time, so.
So there's one that really sticks out, and it's a funny one, and it's not even like about, it's not at all about my skill, but and it's a friend we have in common, Emmanuel Inwang, who may be on this at some point.
Maybe
I don't
need
know.
to bring him on board.
He is a brilliant person. I met him on Uprising as well. And I persuaded him to come and work with me at City Gateway just for 6 months before he went off on Teach First, because I just knew what an impact he would have on the young people that we were working with. Anyway, fast forward a few years, and we kind of passed, so we literally met like in King's Cross Station, or we like passed in the street, and every now and then he and I just seem to do this in London. It's very strange. But we met, and he said, Sarah, like, I'm developing this new vision for how we should do like care for kids in this country that are in foster care, and I've got my bit of seed funding from Teach First Network, but I'm now like in the place where I need to start to get the next bit of money in. And I was doing my masters, and I was chatting to this woman who had her own family foundation, and then so a few days later he just like pitched, he talked me through it, and I was totally on board with him and the vision. So I sat next to this woman, and I just said it to her, and she just said, "That sounds like something I could fund." Wow! And I just
nice.
And it was the first bit of like external funding, because Teach First, yes, it was funding, but it was still within that network. He's now literally, like, I think as we speak, he's opening the first children's home, and it could just transform the most disadvantaged group of kids in this country. So that's something I will always be proud of.
That's such a story, and I can just tell from your energy and the way you're speaking about it. And for me, knowing Emmanuel too, and the journey he's been on, to see him do that now, I never knew it's opening now. So that's wonderful, and I definitely will bring him on board. And I never knew about the connection there with you. And I think for me, that I take from that, first off, friendship, the importance of friendship, of keeping in touch with great people, spotting talent, bringing them on board, inviting you to the team. but also supporting people throughout their life and their career and helping them achieve what they want to achieve. Also, one other bit there is just the serendipity that is possible by being in a city like London. And I think sometimes you forget about space and places, and you say you're going to potentially do some work in the northwest or whatever, and creating that serendipity and creating hubs of people is a very important part to that as well. So wonderful story as a penultimate thing. Before we end, I do have a question about politics, and then one last one on education. Do you have time, by the way? Because
yes.
I know that we've got
Go
2 minutes. So, politics. So we've kind of touched upon the practical parts of fundraising and how to also choose a career which you're proud of and you look back on with happiness, if you will. When it comes to politics, you've kind of mentioned the importance of it in terms of decision making, national impact and policy. I mean, why have you personally been engaged in politics? You mentioned Susie strives for a bit. Like, why does it matter to you, and why do you think other people should use politics as a means to create social change?
Yeah, so Susie's obviously a friend of both of us, and it was her who first made the case to me when we worked at City Gateway together.
Susie Stride is the person who ran for Harlow.
Yeah, she ran. She was selected as the candidate for the Labour Party in Harlow up until the 2015 election, and so we had three and a half years where she was campaigning up there, and in the end we lost. And you learn a lot more from when you lose, of course, than when you win. And I must say as well, like I've spoken a little bit about the successes I've had in fundraising, but actually I've also seen it the other side, and I've been responsible for charities when things are not going so well. But going back to the point on Susie, so she kept on saying to me, if you care about these kids in the way that you clearly do, you've got to care about what's happening in the structure and in the political sphere, because that's where you can impact on things like, are these kids going to get their allowances? Are they going to get free travel or not? What's the budget we're going to spend on education? All those sorts of big questions. And so she then we basically did this campaign together, and we got her selected, which again was another point of very close to burnout. I was working the job in the day and then running her campaign in the evening and getting to bed at 2, 3 a.m. and doing the same day after day after day. And then we had this 3-year piece where we knocked on so many doors in Harlow, and what came then, I remember standing there on the day and in the count, and the big thing that for me over the few days that followed was, what if in those hours I'd spent in Harlow, I'd actually done something, actually made a difference to that community? What if I'd helped them to set up a food bank, or somehow had a real tangible impact in those people's lives, rather than just constantly asking them who they were going to vote for in a few years' time.
Okay, and I mean, is that a dilemma caused by the fact that you lost, and had you won, you would have thought it was all worth it? I mean, it's a very good question to ask. Where do you spend your time? Is it in direct service provision, or is it in democratic work and participation and big P politics? 100%,
and it's something I've wrestled with,
okay,
and I'm still wrestling with. I'm not finished on that journey yet. But I think what I did decide, first of all, I think you shouldn't be doing politics, and you shouldn't be doing anything on social justice until you've properly understood and walked with the people that are actually facing the challenges. And when I say that, it does frustrate me a little bit that there are plenty of people who kind of take jobs that are kind of in the social justice sphere or in the political sphere, who've never tried to actually understand the challenges that communities are facing. It's very easy to write reports on things, but until you've actually gone and sat with those people and heard their stories, then I think be very, very careful about what you're willing to say on their
how does
behalf.
one do that? So, before embarking on a career, do you go...
volunteering.
Volunteering.
It's the youth club. I think for me it started in that youth club. And then spending time in not just necessarily heading into head office roles in big charities, as much as there's a time and a place for that. But I think go and find the kind of grassroots organisations in your community and spend some time, volunteer at the food bank, and listen to people and actually engage, get to know them, and work out what's the role that you can play. Because I think humility, we need to be a lot more humble, and we need to give the voices back to those that are actually facing these injustices. And it's something that, again, is a personal journey for me, and I'm really excited about So having kind of been through very much, the frontline time work I was talking about, and spending this time in Harlow and feeling like actually I wanted to spend my time doing something that was a little bit more impactful, I stopped doing so much politically. I joined the board of this charity in the East Midlands. I ended up chairing that for several years. And then I've kind of come full circle again, and I'm back at the place of and I need to change these problems, and I need to change them at a higher level. And so, I'm back in a position of trying to re-engage in more of the systemic places, and that's what I'm doing. As I said, kind of what Big Change is up to is how do we change the structures around young people so that they can thrive, and fundamentally then that's kind of brought me back into okay, what's my role in more of that political sphere. Well,
let's end on that. So, what you just raised there are important bits about kind of figuring out where you best suit, but also recognizing that life, hopefully is long, and sometimes you go do one thing and do the other thing, and you're actually learning from each side. And in the same way, if you might work as an activist and you bring some of those lessons into the startup world, and the cross-pollination is very important. So whether or not you do that in your own career, or also learning from others in different industries is very important. For you, one of the biggest challenges you're facing now is how to change the education system, a huge challenge. What is the specific part of that you're trying to address, and how are you doing so?
So what we believe is that...
And who's we?
We being Big Change, I guess, and we're working very closely with IPPR on this work, and a number of other state, important and influential kind of stakeholders in the sector. But fundamentally, we're starting from the point of there's a lot of organisations and a lot of thinking going in right now to what we should do in the next year or the next 2 years, and there's a lot of focus on things like narrowing the gap on attainment and doing more for disadvantaged groups and things like that. That is all positive, right? There's no need to kind of stop on that stuff. But what we are saying is that actually we need to think about what we talk about as a third horizon. So the first horizon is where we are now. The second horizon is where we could get to with some incremental changes in the existing system. But the third horizon is where we could be if we actually stopped and started to rethink the purpose of the system from the start. And we start to, under a new purpose, we start to develop a very different way of approaching how we create lifelong learners for the future. Because right now we focus on how do we get kids through a bunch of exams, right? Fundamentally, that's what our system is about. And actually we believe that we need to move much beyond that narrative into how do we create happy, healthy young people that have the skills that the future of our economy needs them to have. And the way that we think we need to kind of get there is that we believe that there are 3 strands to what we have to do. We have to embark on some really meaningful evidence and research gathering to understand what's alternatives globally, and how we can do things differently, and make sure everything that we're doing has some sort of evidence base behind it. And we need to give a voice. This is my point before, and humbling ourselves and giving a voice to those that are actually experiencing the injustices of today. So we believe that we need to create a co-mission, but that will be made up of the young people, the employers, the parents, and the teachers that are in the system today. And they have the first-hand experience. We don't need Lord so-and-so and Baroness blah, who've never been anywhere near our state education system, proposing what they think ought to be done. It's time.
The great and the good have their place, but let's talk about real folk.
Let's give them a voice. They have incredible insight and bravery in saying what could be done differently. And so we believe we need to give that group of people a voice. We need to give them the evidence-based ideas. We need to also invest in experimentation and action. So we need to not just talk about what's possible, but show what can be done and back ideas that are already out there. And we need to build a movement for change. So we need to invest in, there's a lot of evidence already that there is demand for change in education, but we need to both give that group that are already on board something to galvanise behind, and we also need to start a narrative and build wider public support for it, because we believe if we do all of those things, the politicians will take note. And we're not trying to, and this is where I give back to, we're not trying to change what, the current Gavin Williamson, who used to run a plumbing company and now thinks he can run our education system. We're not trying to change his view on our education system. We're thinking longer term. We're thinking about the future cabinet, the minister we don't even know because she's not even elected. But how do we start to build now the foundations to show thoughtfully what's possible and how things can be done differently?
Wonderful. All right, I think we're at close. There are 2 sentences I'd love for you before that. 1 sentence on, if you could speak to every single, well, you are speaking to everyone who's listening to this podcast now, who is thinking about doing the work that you've committed to yourself throughout your whole working life, what piece of advice would you give them, particularly those who are either wanting to start to make a difference on the areas they're passionate about?
I think first of all, like, find your why. It's the Simon Sinek, but find your purpose, find the thing that really makes you go, like, that's the thing I want to impact and change. And then talk to people about it. Don't just like try and make this like decision by yourself.
Okay.
So reach out to anybody that you know in the sector. Like, generally people are quite happy to talk, even if you don't really know them. Like, start to have conversations and see where that takes you.
Wonderful. And last sentence, is there something that somebody said to you in the past, a mentor, a teacher, a friend, family member, that's really stuck with you? I know you mentioned the young person you met in the youth club, but another person who said something which you'd like to share with the world of listeners who are in now?
That's a really interesting one. I think, you know, probably for lots of us, it does go back somewhat to our parents. And I've been brought up with a mother who's always had a deep upset and anger with injustice. And it wasn't anything particular that she ever said to us, but just how she brought us up that meant that instead of, as I say, like coming out of quite a privileged, like rural, you know, village, she embedded something in us that meant that we had a much greater awareness of what was really going on in the world and a motivation to do something about it. And it's really interesting, you know, obviously I'm doing what I do, and my brother's an international human rights lawyer who's currently working in Sarajevo on how to develop their legal systems. And so, yeah, probably her influence.
Thank you, Sarah. You, as I said in the very beginning of this podcast, have been a wonderful friend, an inspiration, and somebody who's always kind of pushed for things to happen, but also brought people up with you. And I think that's something that is a special part of your character, that you're always looking around and figuring out, as you say, how you can bring others alongside. And I think that's something which I feel you might not have expressed, but I know for a fact you've done, and I think that's something we can all learn from. So thank you so much. We look forward to seeing where you go, and good luck with it all.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you so much to all of you who have become monthly supporters of the School of Social Justice. Your monthly contributions make a huge difference and allow us to deliver content which is educational and teaches people how to make a difference. If you want to become a patron as well, it's really simple. All you've got to do is go to the schoolofsocialjustice.com website, then click supporters and choose how much you want to contribute, whether it be £20 a month, a £5 a month, or a £10 a month. Let's go with a £10 a month. It's really simple. Put in your details, put in your card number, click pay now, and you become a supporter. Whilst £5 a month is not much individually, it makes a huge difference collectively. And if we get 2,000 patrons, we can independently deliver content to you every single week to help ensure that we fulfill this mission of training the next generation of Martin Luther Kings. Thank you so much to all of you who have become patrons so far. You've made a huge difference and allowed us to continue with our work. And if you do become a patron, thank you so much. Your support means a lot. Take care. Bye.